soon, but I'm going to try to wait to make sure we have a quorum of planning commissioners. We have 3 so far out of the 4 needed. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay.
I had a question. This
Sure.
is being recorded, I gathered. Will it be available for people to watch somewhere, or Orca or what city website later on?
Yeah, it is. It's being broadcast on Orca as well.
So they'll have
And
it
on the city website, right, Mike? Yeah.
Yep. Yeah,
Okay.
the Zoom recording is just a backup in case something goes wrong with the Orca, but I've never had an issue with the Orca media being able to record it and get it onto their website.
Thank you.
Okay, so we've got plenty of planning commissioners here now. So I'm going to call the meeting to order. This is the September 11th meeting of the Montpelier Planning Commission in 2023. We first have to approve the agenda because this is it's a regular planning commission meeting, so we've got to go through the typical steps. So if I can get a motion from a planning commissioner to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Okay, motion from John and a second.
Second.
From Gabe. Okay, those in favor of approving the agenda, say aye.
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 Any opposed? Okay. Agenda's approved. The next thing on the agenda is comments from the chair. Today is about comments from everyone else that's not on the planning commission. So I'm gonna just skip that for now. Later on, I'll be doing an introduction to the listening session, but for now, I don't have anything else to add, except maybe to the planning commissioners that, summer's over, so we'll be resuming our normal meetings. We've missed a few recently, but they'll be coming at a normal rate in the near future, just so everyone knows in case they're wondering. Okay, the next thing on the agenda would be general business, which would that's normally a time in which we would take any questions or comments or concerns about anything that's not on the agenda. But considering the vast majority of this meeting is about hearing comments about density, I am going to assume that there's also people who want to participate and give ideas about other things. But I think putting that before the density conversation doesn't make as much sense. So if everyone's all right, I'm going to essentially bump that down one on our agenda. And to put it another way, I just plan to, once we're done with the density discussion and people are through giving us feedback, then I would want to just open it up to other zoning issues that people have and do it that way, if that's all right with everybody. Okay, so that's going to be our plan. So with that, we are at the reason for the evening, which is the Montpelier Planning Commission's holding this listening session for the development of some potential zoning amendments. Mike is going to give some background. Before I pass it off to you, Mike, I did plan to just kind of introduce some of the topic here, which is, welcome. I'm Kirby Keaton. I'm the chair of the Planning Commission in Montpelier. This discussion that we're going to have is mostly about the concept of density and zoning. So one thing I wanted to make sure that we cover before jumping into it is to make sure that we're all on the same page about what density is. So just in case anybody's not incredibly familiar, if they're fuzzy about it, in the zoning context, density is the number of the units that are allowed per square foot on a parcel. So that's the, as it's used in the Montpelier zoning, that's what density means. So what it doesn't mean, just for clarification, is it doesn't have anything to do with the size of the building. It doesn't have anything to do with the shape or the design or anything like that. we have a whole bunch of other zoning that does address that stuff, and other things, like design review too, which we're going to be talking about tonight. But so that's what density is. It's about the number of units that are allowed on a parcel for the square footage of the parcel. The reason why we're having this discussion, or a big part of the reason anyway, is that an organization called Congress for New Urbanism, which is a planning think tank, a national, well-regarded think tank, kind of on its own, working with AARP of Vermont, reached out to the city. It's been a year and a half now, actually, and one of the major suggestions that they had was that Montpelier should get rid of its zoning density caps, because they thought that was one of the quickest ways to bring down barriers to housing. So what we've done tonight to kind of set the stage is the Planning Commission's put forward some of its own ideas about how we could go about addressing this. It's not just the Congress for New Urbanism, by the way. I just want to make that footnote. It's also about housing for us, because that's a big priority. Our understanding is that a majority of the residents in Montpelier recognize that a lack of housing is a major problem in Vermont, potentially the biggest problem in Vermont. And he's probably up there with childcare as something that's just always a major problem in the last decade or so. And so it's a major problem, and that's part of it too. And housing, is on our minds all the time with Planning Commission. What we put forward was a few ideas. I'm going to throw them out there real quickly because I don't want to take up a ton of time. But some of the things we put out there for people to respond to are the potential for us to not have density caps, a density cap being, a limit on how much density, how many units are allowed on a parcel, in the design review district, which is a district in our zoning that is regulated based on the appearances of things. Because Congress from New Urbanism noted the design review district and design review rules in its letter, and it's also, we know, a concern of the community, that any changes we make that are to encourage housing, we want to balance with the aesthetics of our community. We want our community to have the same character, that we want to just allow space for more people. So that's one thing. No density caps and design review district. The logic being design review district already covers aesthetic issues very well. Another thing we've thrown out there is just allowing 4 units everywhere. And that would just mean that if you're trying to have an in-law apartment situation, or if you're trying to have make your house to a duplex, that which that's allowed everywhere. But if you're trying to add units and you've already got a small number of units, that's just going to be something that Montpelier allows. We've also, considered something like maybe instead of moving away from density entirely, like CNU had suggested, we could double the density, and we could do things like instead of basing it on design review, we could just base it off of eliminating density just around the downtown area, and kind of do it in a different, like something that's off design review, but similar. So those are the things we've kind of put out. We're really looking forward to hearing what other people have to say. Like I said before, we're going to take suggestions and things. I'll try to make sure there's time at the end for zoning issues and topics that are not density related. And this is a listening session. It's not a hearing. We haven't decided anything. It's not something that's required by law. We really just want to hear from people before going forward with our stuff. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to you, Mike, and from there we can get going.
All right. Well, I have a presentation that I put together, but you kind of went through most of the pieces. So I don't know where everybody's background is on a little bit of the history. So maybe I'll just very quickly go through And so for people who are just trying to get caught up, haven't been familiar with the whole process, the city went through a very major zoning rewrite in that was adopted in January of 2018, and that made changes, a lot of changes, changed our zoning significantly in the city, making most neighborhoods 90% compliant. And by that we mean prior to that, most of our housing units were non-conforming, which meant we had zoning regulations, but nobody's houses actually met it. They were all grandfathered in because they were built before the zoning, and that doesn't make any sense. If we love our neighborhoods, let's make the rules that allow great neighborhoods to be built. So we changed our zoning to make sure that 90% of our neighborhoods were correct. So your setbacks would match what we actually see on the street, and your densities and your uses all matched what was on the streets. We also made changes that allowed duplexes on all conforming lots. We added some environmental rules that didn't exist before, including riparian wetlands and slopes. We loosened the rules on parking, which used to be very strict, not necessarily in how many parking spaces were required, but in how you count them and how you're allowed to put them in. And we streamlined the permitting, so permitting is much faster, much more efficient now. And then we amended them about once per year to fix a number of small things, some small, some big, but we would each year come back with another amendment. And the last one was done in 2022. We haven't made an amendment yet, 2023. This one was supposed to be in March, and then April and May and June, and now it's been pushed. So we're still trying to get this one in for this year. And as Kirby mentioned, we did, after those were reviewed, we did have AARP and the Congress for New Urbanism take a look at them. I won't go over this too much because Kirby kind of went through it, but they recommended moving away from density. They noted that design is more important than density. And if the city has strong design regulations, then they didn't feel we really needed to be regulating density as much as we are. And I wanted to point out that the city has revised and updated new design review regulations in 2020 and adopted new design guidelines in 2022 that help people applying for and people administering those new design review rules. And this is a picture. Don't know if you can see my cursor, but here we've got Main Street. Here we've got Main Street kind of coming down through the red blob. Here's State Street. This is the area with the Capitol complex. This larger pink area is National Life, is up in here. So if you're trying to get yourself oriented a little bit. And East Street, this is the college is in the design review. Berry Street is coming down in this lower arm. And then Main Street, the roundabout, and a little ways past the school. So it kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what's in our current design review district. You'll sometimes hear the historic district. The historic district is different. It covers different properties. So some areas where you see like 9-3 and 9-4 would be in the historic district, but not in the design district. And then there are areas like National Life that are not in the historic district but are in design review. So they're really two separate areas. So design review is what we regulate, and there's a set of rules for that, some of which are administrative and some of which need to go to the design review committee. And Kirby also went through this really quickly. What is density? It's dwelling units per acre. So a dwelling unit can have any number of bedrooms and bathrooms. So a 7-bedroom, 3-bathroom house is considered one dwelling unit. It's not counting the number of people that live there. So when you think density, sometimes people think people. It's the number of dwelling units. And one dwelling unit can have 7 bedrooms. But that same house could be divided into a 3-bedroom apartment, a 2-bedroom apartment, and a 1-bedroom apartment. Same house, maybe the same number of people living in it, but it's now counted as 3 dwelling units. So a lot of times that's why Congress for New Urbanism and others are trying to get away from using the density of dwelling units, because density of dwelling units doesn't necessarily really match what is on the ground when we're talking about the number of people or the impact on the neighborhood. So some of the final density background stuff. There's no density in the urban center right now. So urban center 1, 2, and 3, which is your downtown core, parts of Berry Street, all those areas, there is no residential density. You can have as many units as you can fit into the buildings. Another thing to keep in mind with density is that the bigger homes, many of these bigger homes that were built a century ago, were built for bigger families. So in the 1950s, the average household size had more than 4 people in it. Today, there's less than 2 people per dwelling unit. So, we've got the same size house, but half the number of people living in it. And currently, more than 40% of all households are people living alone. So a lot of times, we're really looking at trying to get more dwelling units, not because we're looking to get more people, but because we've just got big houses with 1 person living in it. And so that becomes an issue for taking care of things. These were the 4 things that Kirby went over for the planning commissioner thoughts that we would have you think about. Removing density from that district we were talking about. Maybe we don't regulate density in the design review district because Congress for New Urbanism says as long as you're doing a good job with your density, you're doing okay. Or with your design review. And we have good design review rules, and here's the area they apply. We could remove density from additional zoning districts. We could remove density for projects of 4 units or less. We already do that now. If you've got a conforming lot, you can have a duplex. We could change the zoning to say if you've got a conforming lot, you could have 4 units. It's just another idea that's on the table. We want to put some ideas on there. And then another one is, as Kirby mentioned, doubling the density in all districts. And that would still have some density limits, but would simply expand the amount of potential development that could happen. And these are just a couple other changes that are being considered that are housing and density related, that are, because we are looking at doing a zoning amendment. We are looking at rezoning Country Club Road. We are looking at the requirements for what is now called Act 47, was called S100. These are the Home Act that was changed by the legislature. And it has a requirement that all districts with water and sewer allow 5 units per acre. The bill actually has a lot of requirements. We already meet all of them, except for this one. And that's because we have one zoning district of Res 24,000 that wouldn't meet this requirement. So Town Hill Road would have to be rezoned Res 9,000 in order to come into compliance with that statute change. And there's some argument Res 9,000 may need to have density of 1 unit, change to have 1 unit per 8,712. That's 5 units an acre. The reality is I don't think so, because we already allow 2 units. So everyone with a conforming lot can have 2 units. So I think we already meet it, and we could leave it at Res 9,000. But I did want to just mention, these are the only things Home Act related, because somebody may have a question on that. And then we had some other changes that we're looking at, like splitting multifamily into 2 groups and a few other smaller things. But that's not really the focus of this conversation today. This one, we really wanted to just have you guys talk about, what we haven't talked about that you think we should consider, what you like or don't like about the density suggestions. Is there an idea you like better than another, or do you not like any of them? And what questions do you have? We're here and we can answer your questions. So that was my quick discussion, just to try to make sure everybody who may not be completely familiar with our zoning has a quick leveling of the playing field, and we can try to take it from there. And so I guess with that, I can open the floor and start hearing questions or comments.
Yeah, so I can take it back from you, Mike, to call on people, and then like I said, let's talk about density first, and then we'll talk about other zoning ideas after. I guess to facilitate this, we can use the raise hand function on Zoom, which is under reactions at the bottom. And yeah, so there we go. We've got some of those, and we can call on folks. We don't have a ton of people, so I'm not going to set any limits at the moment. I'm just gonna see where we go without rules for a minute. Like if we zoned without rules, maybe that'd be crazy, huh?
All right,
Anyway.
I'm going to be helping somebody get on, so I'll let you guys
Okay.
handle it, and I'll be working on some stuff in the background. We got somebody who's trying to get in.
Okay, thanks, Mike. Okay, Barb, you're first on my screen, so go for it.
Sure. Mike, I know Mike's leaving, but does the Homes Act require that we allow any house to be 4 units? That was the way I was reading it.
Yeah, I had the same question.
Did we get you, Mike?
It looks like he's unavailable. It looks like he's on
Yeah,
the
it does
phone.
look like he's
So-
unavailable. All right,
so
let's ask
we'll
him
save that one.
Save it for later.
Yeah.
I mean, there are certainly some benefits to, I mean, that's why we did the duplexing in the first place. There's certainly benefits to increasing that to 4 units per building. One of my concerns is what would we do about parking? You know, we still have the 1 parking space per unit currently. And that's going to increase the amount of parking required. Also, and this is just my particular bone to pick, but it seems like every time when we add an ADU, there's an additional pretty substantial fee for a sewer hookup, even if we are not hooking up sewers. So does that mean that 4 units adds that cost to a homeowner for each of those additional units? And I think finally, my concern about the 4 units per building is, does that trip any kind of sprinkler requirements from the city? So I'll just leave it at that in terms of that particular piece of the zoning suggestions about 4 units per acre, or sorry, 4 units per building.
Okay, thanks, Barb. Joe, I had you next on my screen.
You're muted.
Sorry about that. I was trying to lower my hand. Hey, so a couple of quick questions in reviewing what Mike just presented. Obviously, there are some areas of the districts that are proposed for higher density that were impacted by the flooding. And I'm just concerned, okay, what are we thinking about moving forward if we're going to try and rebuild downtown? I mean, shouldn't we wait until there's some sort of consensus as far as what we do as far as rebuilding some of these areas that are in the flood zone? Obviously, National Life's not impacted, up towards the college is not impacted, but I'm just concerned that we increase density and we're going to be in a flood zone. And we saw what happened downtown in July of this year. And we don't know whether we're going to have a similar situation next year or 10 years down the road. The second part of my question is, I believe we did a major rejigger of the zoning in 2018. I wanted to find out what the impacts of increasing the density has been so far. Have we seen a dramatic increase? As far as I know, we haven't seen a dramatic increase as a result of the density. So I'm wondering if this change is going to have zero effect as well. And then the last question I had is, I believe that it was Minnesota eliminated density limits in 2019, right after we changed our zoning. And I believe that initially they haven't seen much in terms of results. I was wondering if there's any studies that you are aware of to figure out what's the long-term impact on something this big of a change. I just want to find out if you have any data.
Yeah, it looks like Mike's occupied. I can try to handle what I can about what you asked. As far as the flooding, is something that we've talked about. In general, just outside of this conversation, because it's bigger than that, you know, the idea of new construction in flood areas is, you know, something that's put on our mind. And so far, we've talked about how with new construction, it has to be built with flood mitigation in mind, and we have a lot of rules about that. And then Mike can speak to specific like examples better than me, but my understanding is that a lot of the buildings that were hit hard with the flood were like grandfathered. They're not as high up as they should be. They have basements when we actually wouldn't allow that now, and on and on. So if any new construction happens, just period, due to any kind of zoning stuff we do or some other reason, we're expecting that if it's happening there, that we actually do have good rules and regulations in place for new construction. We just haven't had a lot of new construction, so the stuff we have is not caught up, and that's my understanding of that situation. Has there been a major increase since 2018 changes? I'm not sure exactly which ones you're referring to, but because downtown's been zoned without density caps for longer than 2018. But I don't know of any significant moves forward from that, and I don't think that we don't see this change as any silver bullet type thing whatsoever. We see this as an incremental. There's a lot of barriers to housing, and this is one, but it's by itself. We're not expecting it to be huge. That where we do think or hope that it will have impact is with people converting large houses into multi-unit, either rentals or condos, or turning the big houses we have into more units is I think the biggest hope we have there. And the Minnesota thing, I don't know, but that's interesting. I'm interested in looking up.
Mike's back on.
Mike's back. So Joe had asked a question, Mike, about if you know anything about any studies that are done, or just anything about Minnesota's experience with changing density or getting rid of density caps.
I haven't heard anything specifically from Minnesota on that. No. I remember the past year or two that there's been a lot of people patting themselves on the back for doing a lot of the stuff that we'd been doing already, but a few of them had removed density caps, but I haven't seen any report of what the impacts of that have been. I assume it's probably Minneapolis or that area.
I think it was the Twin Cities. I believe that they eliminated there. It may even be a state law at this point. I remember reading an article. I'd have to see if I can dig it up, Mike. I may have saved it somewhere. I can see if I can get it to you.
I can Google it. I'm sure it'll pop up on enough of my listservs that I'm on.
Okay.
Steve, I have you next.
Thanks for the opportunity to speak. My interest and concern really and request to you is that you defer any substantive discussion of actual changes in zoning, in density, what have you, while the city wrestles with the aftermath of the flood. We certainly have a housing crisis in the city, but I think our overwhelming reality at the moment is the aftermath of the flood and where we're going to go from here. The city, as you know, has undertaken a citywide kind of all hands on deck approach to reviewing what happened and looking at ways to go forward. Among other things, expertise will be sought from hydrologists, from engineers, from structural engineers, housing people, public safety officials. We honestly don't know what direction the city is going to want to take at this point. And I think that it makes sense to defer any substantive discussion of zoning until we know what that might be. For instance, will concerns about residential development in flood-prone areas look to increase housing opportunities in other zones where it may not be so, where there may not be so many opportunities now? Mike mentioned the country club changes. Will the city want to do more at the country club that is not consistent with the present ideas on zoning changes? I honestly don't know, and I don't think any of us know at this point. So I'm basically suggesting that you delay or defer any thoughts on actual changes until we have a clear idea of where the city as a whole wants to go. And as a sub note, I'd say I hope that you all intend to participate in that process and deal with one or more of the topics that have been identified for further review. So thank you and good luck.
Thank you, Steve. Michael Reed, I have you next.
Yeah, thank you for allowing me to speak. Had one question, and if they're now allowing by law the 4 units per dwelling, the fourplexes, doesn't that mean that even in the 24K, roughly half an acre, you end up with more than 5 units per acre?
So yeah, one of the changes to in the Home Act was a requirement that in zoning districts that have water and sewer, which is all of our zoning districts except for the rural district. The rural district by definition is the area that doesn't. So if you're in a zoning district that's not rural, then you've got sewer and water. And by law in 2024, when it goes into effect, it has to be a permitted use for single family, 2 family, 3 family, and 4 family. That doesn't mean the 4 family is exempt from the density requirement. So if you were in we'll just round things off. If you were in a 1/4 acre zoning district, then you'd have to have 1 acre in order to have your fourplex. So that's it, but you can't make it a conditional use. It has to be a permitted use. So even though you might have say a 1/3 of an acre lot, it wouldn't necessarily allow you to have 4 units because you still don't have enough density. And that gets to the other part that we're talking about, the density requirement. Should we have this density requirement? Does that kind of answer your question?
I think so, yes.
Okay.
And Jen, just a couple of comments. It seems to me what you are advocating or thinking about is moving from basically individual owners to renters. If you're talking about dividing up large houses into multifamily units, then you're going from a single owner to a landlord-tenant arrangement. Is that basically what you're thinking about?
It doesn't technically have to. So one of the differences is you could. We don't regulate the ownership type, so you will find a number of these in the city. On Loomis and Liberty, you'll find some. They'll make condominiums, so you'll actually divide it up and buy and sell pieces of it. So you might own 1/3 of the house. All 3 of you are in a condominium and you own 3 pieces of the house. So it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be landlord. You could still end up owning a portion of it as a part of a condominium. So but yes, it would, there is that obviously there would be a number of things like making more landlords, but it's not necessarily the only outcome that could occur.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I would throw in there on just the policy issue of we know that we need renters and homeowners in Montpelier. Both the housing market and the rental market are both, statistically in terrible shape. So I guess we're not thinking about that specifically. We're hoping that it helps both.
Okay. Yeah, and I would make the observation that from other cities and so on, that is likely to change the character, for better or for worse. And then finally, I'd like to follow up on one other person's comment, is that I would like to have a good feeling that the changes in density that are being discussed will really help the housing. We've seen a number of developments in the Montpelier area that seem to be moving very slowly. One which sounded really promising up at Isabel Circle, which was going to be cluster housing and so on. But my understanding, it's now just back to single family. So there seem to be a lot of barriers to housing. And I would hate to see the city changed dramatically in its character without really addressing, and I should say individual neighborhoods changed in their character without adding a lot of housing and still having the problem of the other barriers being there. Certainly what I've heard, the little I've heard from developers, is that Montpelier is a really difficult place to do development, and it's not just the density requirements that are keeping them from building. Thanks.
Thank you, Michael. Phil, you're on next on my screen.
Thanks. I just first wanted to clarify, I'm not sure I quite understand the requirements of this new Act 47. I went and looked at it. I'm just going to read one sentence to you. In any district that is served by municipal sewer and water infrastructure that allows residential development, multi-unit dwellings with 4 or fewer units shall be a permitted use unless that district specifically requires multi-unit structures to have more than 4 dwelling units. So I guess before I out for my comments, I just wondered if Mike could explain one more time to me how this works and why that density rules would override that requirement in this law.
All right, so you kind of ignore that last phrase, which was added in later by them, which basically the legislature was trying to address a very specific case in St. Albans where they don't allow single-family duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes because they only allow multifamily. So that's what that last sentence is getting to. But the first part about makes it a permitted use. There's a lot of things even today that you have that are permitted use, but they are contingent upon you having the correct density. So if you, in today's zoning, wanted to go and build a quadplex, we would make sure that you had enough density to allow the quadplex to happen. If you do have the density, then it's a permitted use. And we had, I think, the same question that you're rolling around and pondering in your head, which was, what did the legislature mean in this? Did they mean that quadplexes, 4 units, are allowed anywhere single family homes are allowed, or is it as we said with the density? So we did contact our attorneys and we got an opinion from our city attorney that said it was what I explained, how I explained it to you, which is that the density still applies. It is a permitted use. So if you were in residential 6,000, you would need to have 24,000 square foot lot in order to put in a 4-unit building. But that would be a permitted use and could not be a conditional use under the new state law. And for our city already, every 1-unit, 2-unit, 3-unit, or 4-unit use is already a permitted use, which is why I said that provision won't change anything in our zoning, because we already have all of our smaller single families, single family, 2-family, 3-family, 4-family are already permitted uses, but you need to meet the density requirement in order to build them.
Helpful, thank you. I think I get it now. I just wanted to echo some of the comments earlier that in the wake of the flood, we really do need to think about where we're going and see what makes sense. For instance, a lot of the areas that either have no density or proposed to have no density in the design review were flooded. Building new structures in those areas means the water that would have been in that part of the floodplain now has to go somewhere else. So it in essence, it displaces the water when you build in these floodplains. And I think that's what a big thing we're wrestling with is how do we allow the river to flow. And I think there's some question as to whether that makes sense. The other thing, if we build a lot in the areas that were flooded and a flood comes, even if they're above the flood level, those people may need to be evacuated, and we'd have to have plans for that. All their cars would have to be moved out if they're in the floodplain. So I just, again, think maybe we ought to think a little bit more about where we want the development and whether we want it in the floodplain. Beyond that, you did say, Kirby, that this would be an incremental change. I don't think I've seen a lot in the neighborhoods that's come about with the density we've seen already. I think it's really the answer to the more housing is, I'm afraid, big projects, which there's several being talked about. There's the Bow Brothers Apartments, Isabel Circle, Habitat for Humanity, Down Street, Country Club. Building is so expensive. I saw a figure recently that building a house or apartment unit is $500,000 or approaching that. And so I think building larger projects at scale may be the only way we're really going to get more housing. I'm also beginning to think that Berlin and their plans for Berlin Town Center may be part of the answer for our area. And so it may be that downtown Montpelier isn't the right place for some of these projects. It's a very frustrating situation with housing now. The interest rates have gone up. The construction costs are high. We don't have enough workers. The Great Recession, a lot of people got out of construction. So it is a challenging thing. I read recently that the Chamber of Commerce is pushing the Vermont Futures Project, in which they're proposing that we increase the state population by 25% in the next 12 years. I just don't see how that's going to work with these challenges for housing. I'll just finish with two quick ideas. I've been promoting this for a long time. There are a lot of homeowners who are getting on in age and might want to downsize to a smaller house. So if there are condos or units available for those folks, that would open up their homes to younger families. If you're selling a house, you do have some money to put toward a new unit. So finding some way to encourage that kind of construction in Montpelier would make sense. And I don't know how you accomplish the last thing, but we have an extreme shortage of workers, and whether you could get employers to get together and build some housing that would be for their own workers, something along those lines may be needed. I just see shortages everywhere, and they're building a new memory unit down at Gary Home. It'll be interesting to see if they can find people to staff it. So that's a big problem, and I don't have a real solution, but just wanted to mention that. But thank you for your work on these. I think these are big topics, and the public needs to chew on this stuff a while. So I, again, urge you not to rush and maybe have another hearing with a little better publicity about what's happening. Unfortunately, that bridge issue where you had the ad was just after the flood, and that never got mailed to everybody in Montpelier. So I think there are a lot of people who haven't become aware of the kind of things being discussed here. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Phil. Joe, you're next on my screen, but I'm gonna try to give Nathan a turn first, and then I'll circle back, assuming you still have something. Go ahead, Nathan.
Sure. Hi, everybody. Thank you for holding this, and I'm sorry that I had to join late. I was on another meeting, so I don't want to assume that things that I have to add are not already been covered. And Mike, I missed your I gather you had an initial presentation, and so I'm sorry to have missed that. I think that, Phil's comments about building actual brand new housing, as far as I can tell, are accurate. The math is almost insurmountable in terms of if you want to build rental units and make the math work, at least from my perspective as a sort of small time landlord. But we have just give a couple of examples of ways that we can make incremental difference. My wife and I just bought a duplex on Brown Street, and it's a very large square foot building. It's on a very small parcel, and with the current density rules, the only way we could add, transform parts of that building to a third or a fourth unit is by using the planned unit development, and having to check the boxes in terms of getting density bonus. And those are not necessarily easy hoops to get through, and some of them add cost. If the density levels were changed or opened up, with a lot less investment, I could make that building into a 4-unit building, add 2 units of housing to Montpelier, which would be, I don't know, something like 20% or 100% of which housing has been added in the last year. That's hyperbole, but when we look at how much housing are we actually adding, and the answer is very, very little. To me, that seems like an easy way to get to yes. We have 2 other properties that have sort of garages or outbuildings that I could see becoming housing on a similar footprint to what they have. I haven't done the density test in those cases, but I would love to get to yes on that. I would love to be able to do that. And we're at a stage in our lives financially where we can take maybe some risks and wait a little bit longer for something to pay off. 10 years ago, that wasn't the case, and as soon as the kids are in college, that may not be the case for a little while. So I just think, not all of us are Malone or Rubellini or whomever who have, I'm making an assumption, but who have access to capital that I just don't have, and maybe their timeline is different. But I think that I can't imagine that I'm alone in terms of folks who have control over some property and have care to attend to the housing issue and want to make I would love to make something that's accessible flat living. I'd love to make there's some great goals we could work towards, and I think so. Change the density limits would be my first ask, and then it's been a little while since I've read through the zoning, but the height, I think if someone were to build something new, if you can go to 5 stories instead of 3, and again, I may be operating on bad information, there may not be height restrictions as I think there are. At least we're not facing, at least in some districts, the need for there to be parking spots for a new unit. If that's still true in outlying, res whatever 9, I don't know what the other settings are, but I would love to see that go away. I realize that it's fraught, right? Just people are going to find a place to park their cars if they have them. I'd rather deal with that problem than deal with the fact that housing is going to become unaffordable for many people in Montpelier, because I control part of the very, very limited stock of rental housing, and one effect of that is that I can essentially start charging almost anything I want if I chose to do so, because people are so desperate to live here, and that's a kind of injustice that I think we would rather not support. And then this is not a zoning question, but if someone's building an ADU or something like that, is there a way that the city can collaborate and either handle all the cost of or some of the cost of the sewer line, the sewer and water from the unit to the street? Because again, I haven't priced that out, but if it's $20,000-$30,000, that's a huge delta on a sort of small project, and it'd be great to see that. I would love to see a sort of a saying, how can we help contribution from the city. And that's not to say that's not what I've received. I haven't explored that, but I would, anyway, so that's another thought. And then the overarching one for me, I think, is that, and again, probably not a zoning question, but if we had a city funded revolving housing loan fund, and I'm talking 10 or $20 million, where if Phil Dodd wants to build a 6-unit and he's got control of a piece of property to do it, and he says it doesn't pencil out at, $300,000 for a 1,000 square foot 2-bedroom, but if the city's willing to underwrite, 30% of it, it'll pencil out for me. The city gets to keep that equity. They could extract that equity at some time in the future, put it back into the revolving loan fund. That, I feel like if we as a community are committed to growing housing and density within our boundaries, I pay a lot of taxes in this town. Sign me up. I'll pay more taxes to support that fund, because that's a way forward. That's all I got. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Nathan. And some of that stuff was really, really on point. Like, I didn't realize that there'd be someone here with the perfect example like that of what we're trying to get done. So it makes us feel like connected to real life, as opposed to just policy, decision making without that connection. So that was fantastic for me. Okay, I'm gonna go to Emma Zavez next.
Hi there. Let me see if I can turn on my video. Okay, I can. Hi. So my name's Emma Zavez. I live in Montpelier. I'm the chair of the Montpelier Housing Committee. And I'm here sort of with my Montpelier resident hat on and sort of Montpelier Housing Committee. We hadn't seen any of these options before, so we don't have a comment prepared, but I guess I just wanted to echo, somebody said that they would love to see another hearing on this. I would love to see more of a community-wide discussion about what types of housing we do want to see and where, and I guess maybe having examples of, so there were sort of 4 options laid out, but having examples of what does that look like if we go with option 1 versus option 3, like what could that look like if it was played out, if it really did change things, so that people could sort of make an informed suggestion as to what they would like to see. Because just looking at those right now, I don't know. And yet I think about housing a lot. So I'm sure there are other folks in that boat as well. And I also wanted to say that the Housing Committee, we are always working on a million projects, as are you guys, I'm sure. But we would love to find a way and find time and energy to work more collaboratively with you all, to whether it's having some of those discussions or looking more intensively at the zoning regs to identify barriers to building more housing. I think maybe Kirby, you said, like, we don't think this is a silver bullet. We're not sure what this will do. We've talked about wanting to sort of try to identify some more of the features of our current zoning that could be changed to really start seeing some real change on the ground in terms of building. And I appreciated the previous commenters' suggestions and would love to see more of that.
So lots to respond to there. I think that members from the Housing Committee should definitely we should follow up. We should talk more about this. You're always welcome to come to our meetings. Obviously, the biggest way I see us communicating with you is through the recommendations that you've made for us to work on the city plan, and what we work off of there. You may miss in the beginning that this is just a listening session. It's not the hearing. So yes, there will be actual hearings. We haven't put anything official forward yet. That's why this is not an official thing. So yeah, I think that would be great to touch base more between the two groups. Okay, great.
Yeah. Do you have any examples of how the 4 different options would play out, or is that something you might bring to a hearing once you have a recommendation?
Yeah, I mean, to clarify, when I talk about how we don't know how this is going to play out, because we don't know what the market's going to do, or and since it's, there's so many obstacles, as I'm sure and so many people in this meeting know that removing just one, that's why it was great to hear Nathan's example, because he actually did have an example of a project where the density was the thing getting in the way of moving it forward. I think in a lot of things, how they come out is maybe density would be one thing, but we maybe have other zoning issues too that are in the way. So that's how we don't know like how any change is going to go. We know from experience that when we tinker with things, we redid the zoning and we opened a lot of things up 5 or 6 years ago, and the housing market hasn't drastically changed from that, even though our zoning drastically changed, and our zoning did, you know. So that's why if I say that it's incremental or I'm not sure what the impact's going to be, it's just, you know, and you just heard Nathan talk about how unbelievably expensive it is to build here.
Yeah.
I mean, we have so much to do. We have so many
Yeah.
changes to make if we actually want to see some noticeable growth. So that when I say that I'm not sure that it's going to do much, that's why, because we just have but I'm pretty certain that if we don't do anything, if we, you know, say no to every idea that comes up, that we're going to stay exactly where we are. I'm certain about that. So anyway, but how these specific things, I'm sorry, I didn't really answer your question directly enough. You know, if we take away the density caps from the design review district, in my opinion, that expands what's available, an available amount of space a little bit. But since our downtown is part of that design review district, and it's already has those density caps, and since the areas right around that are already have very high density, I'm not saying that is a big major change. That one, the one where the idea that we make 4 units available everywhere, that complements the design review approach, and I think that one will probably make potentially a bigger change, just because it. But it's not focused in the way that we sometimes want to focus, because we want to try to make the housing walkable to downtown. We want to have that kind of community. But that's, you know, and then doubling the density everywhere was one of the ideas. The downside for that for me is that we're still talking about density all the time. And it'd be nice to not do that so we can focus on other ideas and other things. So I don't, but no, I don't think anyone knows. I don't think, and hopefully, hopefully city council, when things like this come to city council, I hope they realize that no one knows, like, exactly, like we have an idea. Like, I don't think any harm is going to come. Like, I'm certain about that. But as far as the impact on housing.
Yeah.
I probably talked too much though about that.
Thank you so much.
So, yeah, I'm gonna.
I guess.
Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
I guess I'll add just two things real quick. One is the reason for some of the incremental density suggestions that were in there. You know, we went through and recommended in 2018 that anyone who has a conforming lot can have a duplex, and the reason for that was because anyone who, you know, it's already state law, anyone who has a house can have an ADU, and the ADU is an accessory dwelling unit. Your accessory dwelling unit is capped at 30%. And everyone was like, well, why don't we make it 50%? Well, 50% of your house is a duplex. And they said, we'll just allow duplexes. So that's how we made that suggestion. It pretty much, let's say, we'll just ignore the density and allow you to have a duplex. And, you know, the world didn't come to an end. And a lot of people have a lot of concerns about removing the density requirement because what could happen? You know, this could happen or that could happen, or somebody can tear down their house and put in a 16-unit building. And we've gone through these public hearings before, and we've heard those arguments before. So a lot of times when we talk about this more gradual approach, the gradual approach of let's double the density. And the idea is let's double the density and show everybody the world's not coming to an end. Everybody's not tearing down their houses to put in giant things. Or let's allow 4 units on a conforming lot. And really the idea is not that we want everybody to run out and convert their house to a 4-unit. Everybody still, there's no requirement to do it. It's just gives somebody an opportunity if they've got the right building to make that happen. And some of this, so when we talk about having kind of a gradual approach, you know, I think as professionals, as in the planning commission, the thought is we don't really think it's going to have a big difference. If we got rid of the density requirement, there's a lot of things that are still problems for developers. But we don't think that the catastrophic things that we sometimes hear at hearings will happen. So that's why we've talked about, let's gradually, let's double the density, or let's make these. And the reason why is just because we want everyone to feel comfortable that as we slowly remove density as being a requirement, that people will see the world's not going to come to an end. And if there are, as they say, there are things that could be problems, we should be able to see them as we gradually release the density requirement. So I think that's what we're looking at, and that's somewhat of that. And the second comment I wanted to make really goes a little bit to Emma's role and to Nathan's comments about things like, can we have a housing revolving loan fund, and can we have these other pieces? And the housing committee does have a subcommittee that is working on those revolving loan funds. Now, we don't have $20 million. We're far from it, but we do have a housing trust fund, and we do have a housing revolving loan fund. And so we are trying to come up with what is the best way that we could use these monies to leverage more housing. How can we make this happen? And so there are people on the housing committee who are working on that exact question. And so if you've got good ideas, I'm sure the housing committee would love to hear different ideas of how we could use some of our housing trust fund money and how we can use some of our housing revolving loan fund money to support accessory dwelling units or other projects. So I just wanted to add that in. That's it.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so Jessica is up next on my screen, and then I'm going to circle back to you, Joe. You've been waiting very patiently.
Hi. I am also a member of the Housing Committee, and I just wanted to make some comments about how important it is for us to do whatever we can do to increase housing in the city and to speed that process up, because there's so many people that need housing, and just maybe I misunderstood the tone of somebody else's comments before in regards to if it was going to increase rentals and if that was good or bad or not. But I just want to say that there's a lot of us that are renters in town that rent from homeowners that are living not in state, and us renters are a huge part of the community. We work here, we raise our kids here, they're part of the school district, and the more families that we can get, whether they're renters or homeowners, is really important for the greater community.
Thank you, Jessica. Okay, Joe.
Yeah, thanks for circling back to me. I had a couple of comments. As we're rethinking some of the zoning, I know that obviously post-pandemic, the office market has still failed to come back, and I don't see there's going to be a return to office work, or at least, even I work for the state, and our office is at Berry City Place. Even on the days where they mandate that we go in, the office is probably about 30% or 40% full. I mean, I'm just wondering if we start looking at part of the zoning regulations that making it easier to convert office space to residential use. The other thing too is, just my background as a real estate appraiser, I know that the cost of construction is north of $400 a square foot in Vermont. It's just material cost, labor cost, everything. That's just for a standard. This is nothing fancy. It's 400 a square foot. So you have to factor that into any sort of density, any sort of new building that we're trying to create. One of the other things I wanted to ask too is, do we know if there's going to be anything regarding Airbnbs as part of the new zoning? Because I think that Airbnbs are taking up some of the what could have been rental housing for long-term renters, and landlords have just decided, no, I'd rather do a short-term rental and make more money that way. So I'm wondering if we're going to address it somehow in this new zoning. And then there was one. Go on, Mike.
Oh, I was just going to quickly answer on the Airbnb. It wouldn't be in the zoning if there is a proposal, and I think the housing committee has been discussing the issue. If there is a proposal, it wouldn't be in the zoning, just because of the way zoning is structured under Chapter 117 and the grandfathering and the non-conforming and the blah, 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 legal mumbo jumbo. It would probably be either an ordinance or a license, would be how you would address Airbnb if it were to be addressed. But it wouldn't be through the zoning.
Okay. And then I did have one last point to make is while I was waiting is I actually did that research on Minneapolis. So Minneapolis did change their zoning in 2018 to allow maximum density everywhere. And out of a city of 425,000, unfortunately, they only had 53 units built as of 2021. So it had virtually no impact on the density. Just FYI. That was my last point.
Barb, you're next.
Oh, thanks, Kirby. Yeah, I appreciated what Nathan had to say because 20 years ago when we made rental units, we had a 2-unit building and we had to turn it into a 3-unit building in order to make it affordable. And now it's quite possible that we need to start creating 4-unit buildings in order to make the numbers work and the rents not to increase astronomically. So, I mean, that the whole idea of creating the opportunity throughout the city for 4-unit buildings seems to make a lot of sense to me. And actually, as a result of the flood, I now have 3 families in my house. Not because it was necessarily planned, but my Airbnb became flood family. So I think for me, the biggest concern about the universal talk about creating no density limits within the design review district is just, to me, it's an elephant in the room, is where are the protections to keep buildings from being demolished? Because if you have no density limits and you're looking at a piece of property and it has an older house on it, it's going to be much more lucrative to tear down that house and create a larger building. So where do we have those controls within the design review district? And that larger building could meet every single one of our other requirements. So it's not, the other requirements are not really enough. And I checked the zoning today to see if there were any stronger requirements about demolition. And I just really don't see them. So I guess that, to me, that's a big question.
Thanks, Barb. And if anyone who's here has developer experience wants to take a stab at Barb's question, then I would be interested in what they had to say. So Nathan, you're next on my screen.
Thanks again. Let's see. I think so. When I talk with Greg Gossens, who has way more experience with this sort of thing than I do, Gossens Bachman or GBA is involved in a project in Burlington right now, it's north of 30 units. I don't know how many more, but we talked about what Joe just talked about, $400 a foot built. And Greg said in Vermont, the tipping point on that being economically viable for a developer is about 30 units and above. And below that, it just doesn't make sense. And even if he's wrong by half, even if that number is 15, I would argue that if we removed all density requirements, the control factor that may answer Barbara's question is just money, right? People aren't going to build a 20-unit building just out of love, right? They're going to do it. It's math. And so if the math doesn't work, they're not going to build it. And, you can look at the last, as far as I can tell, the last dense-ish thing that was built was on Cedar Street, built by Merrill, a 6-unit, where, and he sold it a year and a half, 2 years ago for $1.2 million. It's six 2-bedrooms. I think that's the last dense thing that was built in Montpelier. And I don't know how the math worked for him. But my guess is he did make a killing having built it, owned it for a number of years, and then sold it, even at sort of peak COVID sales price. So I think there are some natural controls And what I was going to say is, wouldn't it be great to find out where that line is, right? Wouldn't it be great if we just removed all the limits on density and somebody built some 30-unit monstrosity and we're like, holy shit, we don't want any more of that. So let's go backwards a little bit, right? Like if we do this incremental, like, oh, let's ease them a little bit more and see what happens. And I'm absolutely not trying to make fun of anybody on this call, but I just think the incrementalism in response to fears about changing the character of downtown or changing the character of our community, sort of want to see how far we have to go to find out we were wrong. And I think we got a long way to go. Let's see. And then the other thing was about, and I'm a little bit out of my depth here, but I think that there's some restrictions on change of use. And another concrete example was that I spent a lot of time looking at and modeling the 8-20 Langdon Street building. That's the Onion River Outdoors Contemporary Dance and Fitness. It was owned by Andrew Brewer, purchased by Gabe and Lucky, I think. And Gabe, I think maybe he's on this committee. Supposed to be. Anyway, I don't know. I would love to hear what Gabe has to say about that. But when I looked at that and I thought, okay, what if a bunch of this building were converted to housing? Wouldn't that be cool? The change of use stuff may trigger ADA stuff. It may trigger, and some of that is quite possibly out of our control. I don't know the details there, but I think, that's a large building. And if that could have been converted, a bunch of that could have been converted into housing, that might have been a +6, +7, +8 units, and from purchase to a year and a half later, and that would be pretty awesome. So I don't know, I don't know what sort of yes factors would have to be put into play to make something like that possible, but I don't know who just said it. I think it was Joe. Is sort of class A, B office space, second floor, third floor stuff, is that just not as much a thing anymore? And if that's the case, what does it take to convert it to housing? Thank you all.
Thanks, Nathan. Peter, you're next.
Yeah, I'm Peter Kelman. I live on Mountain View Street in Montpelier. I'm going to tell two sad stories of my attempts to build, or actually to convert, for rental, to create more rental apartments. 1214 Baldwin Street is a state-owned building, which was advertised as being ideal for a conversion into rental apartments. Turns out not to be, not only that it's not ideal, it's impossible. I looked at the building with a contractor. We saw that we could, with putting some money into it, of course, put in 7 apartments. 2 of them would have been able to be completely ADA compatible because they already were. Because it was, as a state office building, it was made so that certain parts of the building were ADA wide doors, etc. And I was informed immediately by the Department of Planning and Community Development that no, I couldn't put in 7. I could only put in 5 because if you do the density calculations, that's 5.3, and you can't put in 3/10 of an apartment. So it could only be 5 apartments. So already the math becomes less favorable for me because with 7 apartments, I could keep the rents low, etc. And I said, and I said, because I know something about the requirements, I said to the department, I said, well, and what about parking? There's no room for parking on that property because it was a state-owned property and the people from the state used the state parking lots. Could we get a waiver for not to have to provide any parking? Well, no, you can't really. You could apply for a waiver. You could apply to reduce the number of parking spaces. I said, well, could you guys talk to the state about this? Could you see whether the state who wants to sell this building and says it's ideal for residential, do they know that you guys have this requirement? Oh, well, you can do that, they tell me. Well, who do I speak to? Well, we reached out to the real estate agent who handled it, said, no, you can't have that. So here's a situation where I'm ready to invest over $1 million in buying and converting a building to create 7 apartments, beautiful apartments in downtown. And part of the reason is that it turns out that this building is not only in the city whatever district, it's also part of the state complex. We'd have to get state approval. And the reason I have this money is because I am doing what's called a 1031 exchange, because I'm selling the building that we used to live in Brooklyn. And I only have 6 months. And in 6 months, I could never wade through all the crap that was out there to prevent it. So I've gone elsewhere. I've gone to Williamstown, where they have no zoning, zero zoning. And I found a 5-unit, well, it's a 4-unit building that I could put a 5th unit into, and at the same price, with actually the same upfront price, but I wouldn't have to really put much of money into it at all in terms of improvement, because the building is already built. I've also found buildings in Barry, and I've talked to the Barry Planning and Zoning Commission, and they have been very, very helpful, because they want me to come in and buy up an old Victorian and put in 3 and divide it up. And you know, the fire chief came in and he walked through the building with me. Someone from the zoning office came in, walked through the building with me. They pointed out all the things that I would have to do, and then got back to me the next day and said, you know what? The rules say you have to do that, but we could figure out some ways to be more flexible. And what I would say is, it's not just a matter of lifting density requirements. It's not just a matter of, you know, changing the regs. It's a matter of giving the Department of Planning and Community Development the flexibility to do things so that they can say, this is a worthwhile activity. We're going to do everything we can to make sure it happens. And some of the regulations are just written way too narrowly, and it puts the department in a very difficult position. Meredith didn't like having to tell me that I put only 5.3 apartments in there, but she had to tell me that. So I would urge that you guys think about ways to put much more flexibility into it. The other sad story is, I wanted to donate 2 9,000 square foot lots to Habitat for Humanity to put in 2 duplexes on each of them under the new 2 duplex rule, as part of our property here on Mountain View. It's just sitting there. It's just a field. It's got, you know, no value to me, and it would be great value to Habitat for Humanity. But guess what? In order to do that, in order to give away 2 9,000 square feet lots, the requirements of the Department of Public Works and the fire department would have required me to spend upwards of $500,000 in infrastructure. Because we would have had to put in a fire hydrant at the end of our street, the water to go to that fire hydrant, the sewer line, which doesn't even serve our house, what do you call it? Wastewater, stormwater controls, paving the road. And for the fire department, we would have had to put in a huge cul-de-sac so the fire trucks could turn around. Guess what? We already have a place where Casella trucks turn around, fire trucks turn around, snowplows turn around, but no, we have to put in a cul-de-sac, which would take away land, making it even more difficult for us to do the subdivision that we were going to do to enable this. Again, where's the flexibility? Where is saying, hey, we are in a housing crisis. I'm willing to give away some land. Habitat had the plans to build it, and it's virtually impossible for us to do it. Thanks.
Thanks, Peter. That was really great. That's a lot of things for us to tackle because there are a lot of obstacles. Phil, did you have something else?
Just a couple things. Having heard what Peter said, I guess having my eyes open, there may be a lot of other things that need to happen beyond density changes. What he's saying, that alone wouldn't do it. I will say this. Earlier, Mike was talking about incremental changes, and there may be some value in that. For one thing, you've got to get this past the city council. And if you were just to propose lifting all density caps, that might get a lot of pushback, potentially. People may not want a 15 or 30 unit property next door. Those kind of fears might arise. So I think his strategy may have some merit. And, you know, there haven't been radical changes with the density changes so far. And maybe you can move in that direction. The last thing, just echoing what Joe said about offices, I think the office market is dead, and I'm wondering if more landlords will be shifting over to residential downtown in the upper stories, or the state office buildings for that matter. That's a little outside of the zoning area perhaps, but that looks like a promising area to me for getting housing soon. I mean, people are working from home. They're not coming to the office like they used to. So there's a lot of square footage, I think, that could be turned into residences. That's all. Thank you.
Thanks, Phil. Okay, so we'll do the last call for if anyone has anything to talk about related to density, and then so I'll stop. Any more density?
So I did want to add in really quick, Kirby, to answer a little bit, to clarify some of the comments Nathan had on the change of use. So I think the reference he is making to is what would be a change of use in the building code, and not a change of use as we have in zoning. So most of the uses in that area are all permitted uses. But as you make a change of use from a commercial to a residential, that change of use in building code requires a number of changes. That's something we don't have any control over in the planning commission or the planning department. We enforce the state building code through the Division of Fire Safety as a contract. So we're basically enforcing the state building code locally using Michelle Savory, who's our building inspector. So just so everybody's aware, that's just a clarification, so there isn't a confusion that when sometimes we talk about zoning and talk about change of use, we do have a change of use in zoning, but the change of use Nathan was referring to is actually from the building code, and that is a thing. As you just shift from one to the other, some buildings that are already set up with sprinklers can very easily shift from office to residential and residential back to office. If it's always been commercial and has never been residential, then you're in a different class and you need different, I don't know, sheetrock and there are different requirements because you're going to have sleeping residents. And so the fire codes are higher. So just so there's clarification for everyone.
Thank you, Mike.
That was part of what I ran into as well. The building codes.
Yeah, thanks for the clarification, Mike. It looks like we have a new person interested in commenting on density. Sal?
Yeah, thanks. I was just thinking about what Nathan said about being able to charge, whatever he wanted, if he was inclined to do that, and what Jessica was saying about renters being important to the city. It seems like a change in density one immediate effect would be an increase in rental properties, which may bring the cost down slowly, but it may bring it down. I just wonder what tools, if any, does the city have to control ownership?
When you say control ownership, you mean like
landlords?
Well,
rent stabilization or requiring a building of a certain number of units to be condominiums where, you know, the residents own the property, you know, that sort of thing. I don't know what tools are available. I'm just curious what, if any, tools the city has, and, you know, whether they're worth considering. I'm sure they come with problems of their own.
Do you want to answer the question, Mike?
Yeah. So the question on what other tools we have for ownership. So our zoning is actually very open and doesn't restrict ownership types. So we really don't get into, you know, timeshares and condos or owner occupied or renter occupied. We really, in the zoning, keep things out. We're really looking at the buildings and seeing whether they have the minimum requirements for each piece. In fact, we have congregate living as a separate. We talk about dwelling units, but we also have congregate units, which are just slightly different. They don't have, they share some of the required elements. So we don't really regulate it in that way. I think I'm trying to think on the fly. I don't know what rights we have to regulate that through ordinance. And that's, I'm not an attorney, so I can't for sure say that. But what I'll say is, your lesson for the day, your law lesson for the day, states come in two types. You've got a home rule state and you have a Dillon's rule state. So home rule states, towns can do whatever they want as long as the state doesn't say you can't. In a Dillon's rule state, you can only, as a town, you can only do what the state says you're allowed to do. Those are the only rights you have. We are a Dillon's rule state, so we can only do what authorities have been granted to communities. I don't know of any statutes. That's not to say there aren't any there. I think that would be a question that the League of Cities and Towns or our city attorney would have to go and kind of dig into to see if there's any areas where we can regulate ownership type, or, you know, like some states out west are, you know, prohibiting foreign governments or foreign agents from purchasing land in certain areas because they're worried about China purchasing farms near Air Force bases for spying, those types of things. I don't know if we've got those rights. That would be a question for an attorney.
I can just add to that, more direct to the question, just as far as the Planning Commission's attitude. And I think I can safely say that our general attitude is that we think that there's a major problem with a lack of rentals, and there's a major problem with a lack of home ownership, and we would like to address both. And at this point, you know, we want to do things like this to try to encourage both of those things to get better, hopefully. And I just don't even know if we're like, you know, we don't have the luxury of having a preference at this point. I'm not sure that we would ever want a preference, but it's just not something I think that we're concerned with trying to influence. Nathan.
Just was that Sal's comment made me think of something, and this is a little bit outside the 9 dots, but if and we don't necessarily have a city that's terribly entrepreneurial, but it could be that either the city or a sort of extra governmental body like a Montpelier Live, but for housing, could bid on properties that are for sale with the intent to, you know, if it's a 3-unit, with the intent to purchase it, make it into condos, and then sell it to the market as the sort of enabler of that action. And you know, so if I buy a 3-unit, I'm buying a used housing that's pre-existing. I'm not adding to the housing count, and what I'm doing is I'm ensuring my future wealth, right? Because long term it's going to work out. Whereas if those become condos, they are entry points to equity into the housing market for first-time home buyers, which would be awesome. So from a mission perspective, if the city or some arm of the city were to say, let's try to get let's try to help more people enter homeownership by buying that. The one on Franklin just came on the market. It's I don't know, it was a five or six unit, 5 unit, I think. If the city bought that, made it into condos, and then all of a sudden sells 5 condos, and that would be transformative. And if it matched the goals, that could be pretty cool. Just my opinion.
Yeah, thanks, Nathan. Unfortunately, I mean, those really big idea things are just, we're just a little planning commission. It'd be nice if we were the kings of Montpelier and could. But I think that I'm happy to have that as part of it. I mean, I'm not trying to be dismissive, because I think that things like the ideas like that should continue to be part of our conversation, because I think that we can do some big things, and shouldn't be scared to. So, anybody
Kirby,
else?
Yeah, Devora Jonas has been trying to get your attention.
Oh, okay. I didn't see a hand. Maybe
he was waving.
It was waving.
He was waving.
Yeah. I don't know how to do the hand thing.
Okay. Sorry. So, yeah.
That's okay. I just wanted to. I've been listening to this, and I was wondering if even if we have the 4 units as a density thing, if there could be some leeway so that the gentleman who was speaking about wanting to do the 7 units, that one could say, okay, we have this as the general rule, but we can ask for a variance. And couldn't we have an arrangement like that, so that each time someone wanted to do something special, there would be a possibility for it? That's it.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Peter was talking about flexibility, which is, I think, the same thing you're saying. Yeah. Okay. So does anyone else have anything else on density? And if not, I did say that I would open up about other just zoning ideas in case people were coming with those. Barb.
Yeah, just a quick comment to the last speaker. We do have density bonuses available, depending on dedicating different types of apartments or whatever to elderly housing or ADA compliance. So it's possible that they could actually put more units in there than are technically required by the zoning. Those are still in place, correct, Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah, I was able to add 1, so I could do 5 instead of 4, but not 7.
Thanks for the clarification, Peter. Okay. So anything else on density? If not, if anybody has any other zoning ideas, anything they'd like to let the planning commission know about, I want to give that space now if people would like to. Okay, so we're a focus group, I guess. Good. Okay, so with that, I want to move on the agenda, unless we have anything else from any community members. Any planning commissioners want to talk density before we move on? Just had a good listening session. Okay, well, we're going to move on the agenda then. And honestly, we got a little bit of time. So I think we are going to move on to part 6 of the agenda, which is to review the arts and culture word storyboard for the city plan. Mike, do you have anything specific in mind on that?
No, that is another one that is in our drive there, which I don't know if you want to pull it up or if you want me to pull it up.
I can pull it up. Okay. So I had thought that I had looked at this before, and we've had a choppy summer as far as our meetings go. So if folks could take a look at it. It's not something I've recently reviewed. Have any planning commissioners had a chance to take
Were
a
you
look
able
at
to
this?
pull it up or no?
Yeah, I do have it pulled up. I do.
Okay, you didn't share it.
That's because I'm wondering whether we want to just hold off on this or not. So here's the draft storyboard. This is a second draft. My memory is coming to me, right, Mike? We've reviewed this before, and we had.
I remember having, I don't know anything about this, but I remember Maria had a lot of like really good comments. So I remember that we talked about it.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm remembering that. Yeah. And
so maybe it is already
different.
approved. They were asking us which ones had been approved, and I didn't see a quick approval on this one. So
this looks like it's been changed post feedback from us, because it didn't open up this way. So I do think I like it. So if everybody could take a minute just to read over it, see if we notice anything else. Anyone have any feedback so far? The magazine reference thing is something that the consultants did. It's interesting. I don't know if anyone has thoughts on using that reference.
Kirby, do you know if that's a recent best of list?
Yeah, the first time we looked at this, I pulled it up, and it was pretty recent.
Okay.
But those things are always changing, and that's something that crossed my mind, is that magazine may very well put out a new 9 best the next month.
they should probably make a note that they should put a date on that. In 2022 or in 2023.
Anything else? I think it's good to pass along, Mike.
Right, because they're building these things out. I'm going to try to get them in for one of our meetings coming up. Our grant technically runs out at the end of either end of September or end of October. So they're going to be putting together a whole bunch of these, and again, once they're in storyboard, we can always go back. We always still have opportunity to make changes right on through. So, and I think that this just leaves us with community services and land use as the only two that aren't done. So that's good.
Yeah, and as soon as you have any kind of bandwidth, Mike, I think that it probably is good for us to get started on land use. 'Cause that's going to be as a reminder to the Planning Commission, land use is the chapter that we write entirely ourselves. We're not having a draft of something sent to us. So we need to take all of our previous work from the city plan and sum that up into a holistic land use plan. I guess we're going to probably have something to work off of, right, Mike? We'll probably work off of.
I will put a draft. I'll put a draft together that you guys can work with.
So I'll work with Mike, and Gabe and I'll work with Mike to get that going on the agenda soon. But for everybody else, think about a vision for that. We can try to incorporate that vision. I mean, some questions are going to be, how much are flood issues going to be on our minds? How much we talk about housing a lot. Is that something that, want to make a forefront, et cetera? Okay, so I think we're good. We don't without a vote there. Which just leaves us with
the minutes, and if anyone has any questions on what's been going on, obviously we haven't met since, well, we met once briefly since the flood, but if anyone's got questions of that stuff, if you haven't heard or didn't know, we are meeting, we met with FEMA up at the site, up at Country Club Road. So we're actually they're proposing, we'll see if it goes through, putting Washington County's emergency housing, so they're the FEMA trailers, putting 36 FEMA trailers up Country Club Road. So that will hopefully help us build the road system. We made all those plans to build out the lower part of the country club for high density housing. This would give us an opportunity to have FEMA pay for putting in the sewer and water lines into that area, and then we would have the ability to use them later as the FEMA trailers are removed. So that's the one of the things that's going on that you'll probably hear some more about. And we've been obviously spending most of our time in the department just addressing the flooding. Most specifically, my office has been trying to work with, well, from the permit side, we're handling obviously all those permits, but from the personal side, we've been working with the folks that have had flooding into the first floor. So the most significantly damaged folks, we're trying to get money to try to elevate housing and to try to make sure they've got emergency housing. So that's been a lot of our focus, trying to learn all the FEMA rules to try to get ourselves in a position to be able to apply for grants, to tear down, do some buyouts if that's appropriate, but also to try to elevate buildings. And that's a lot of what we've been working on.
Mike, would the city be doing this buyouts, or would it be just kind of facilitating FEMA doing it, or how's that work?
If they're buyouts, we have to be the applicants. I think we'd be a part of it. I know we would be a part of it. I don't know all the specifics.
Okay. And what would be what would the city do with the land after?
It's required, if it gets it to be a buyout, then it's required to be conserved. So that it would become owned by the city, but with a perpetual easement that prevents it to be developed in the future. Which is why we're trying to limit where that happens. In some cases, it's appropriate, and it is the most appropriate thing to do. That happened in Northfield. That's happened in some places in Barrie. There's a number of properties that they should never have been there in the first place, and it's time to buy them out, make sure there's nothing there. We don't have a lot of those Most of ours are places that flooded that would be a fine place to have a house, except that it was never elevated. So what we really need to do is either maybe knock the house down, find a developer that'll knock the house down and build a new house, but elevated, or to help them get some money to let them stay in their house, but elevate their house and keep it. So those are some of the options we're trying to work with people. Maybe they want to sell their house to somebody who wants to elevate it. Maybe they want to elevate it themselves. Maybe they just want to put it on the market and walk away. So those are a lot of the different options people have. And then in some cases, people are looking at a buyout, but we don't have too many of those right now.
Mike, I was just wondering about you said that FEMA is putting in trailers?
Yes.
30 trailers. Well, where did the 30 number come from? And is that going to satisfy, everyone who may have lost housing due to the flood?
So I think the number they're asking for is 36, and it's supposed to be based on their models and estimates of the need. And surprisingly, what they said is if you've got basically 1 in 10 people who are eligible for emergency housing will actually take it. So I'm not exactly sure if it's just because people have other resources, they have other options, if it's just pride, I don't know. But they said usually 1 in 10 is about the going average for people who are willing to accept emergency housing. So we're trying, if you know anyone who needs emergency housing, whether you are a homeowner, whether you are a renter, it has to be people who, I believe, it has to be people who were housed. So an unhoused person can't go in and get one of these emergency trailers. But whoever it is, if you have any thought, you can always go and just register at the FEMA center and go and say you'd like to register for emergency housing and be put on the list. People can always say later they don't want it, but we try to get as many people in to go through and say, go in and talk to them and say you want it. If you know somebody who needs it, whether they're a renter or homeowner, go in and register, because that's how you get on the list and that's how you get in there. And that's how they decide how many trailers to buy and put in there. So.
Okay.
How long are they available to be used as housing?
There's 18 to 24 months from the date of the flood. So it's actually going to take them till December to get them put in and open for business. So that would be, they're trying to get them in for December. So you've already lost 6 months of the 18 months that you can use them for. So that's, but we expect, my expectation is that it would be probably, the reality it takes a little bit longer to get all the way, everybody in, everybody out. Knowing the building seasons up here, I would expect if they were opened in December that they would be open. They wouldn't be open for only 18 months. It wouldn't make any sense. It would have to be probably 24 months because that would be 2 building seasons. So if somebody's house was destroyed, they've got basically most of 2 building seasons to get a new house built or to find new housing. But we'll learn more as the process comes in. We're just in the early stages right now, but I wanted to let you guys know that that is something we've been working on here in the office.
Oh, I think Nathan has. Do you have a comment or question?
This is off topic and very quick. I missed whatever presentation about the 4 sort of thoughts or proposals about zoning. And I just, Mike or Kirby, if I can find a way to look at those sometime, I would like to look at them. That's all. Thank you.
What's your email?
Nathan Suter, NATHANSUTER @gmail.
All right, pretty easy.
We did a write up for the bridge. It's possible that it's on the bridge's website. I haven't actually checked. But yeah, he can send you. Are you going to send him your presentation, Mike? Or
yep.
Yeah.
Okay. And then Mike, my other question, this the raising of the houses in the flood zone sounds just like a major endeavor to me. Like I'm imagining like a house going up on stilts. Is that the idea? Like, is that really?
No, it gets jacked up. So they run boards, beams underneath it, and they lift the house up. So as we were talking about elevating it, it doesn't stay on piers. This isn't like the Grand Banks off of North Carolina or something. This is you'll lift the building up, you'll pour a whole new foundation, you'll pour a slab, and then you put the building back down on top of it. So either there'll be a crawl space underneath it and you keep your wooden floor, or you remove your wooden floor altogether and you set the building down, and then you have a concrete slab which you then put, you can tile, you can put other things on top of it directly. But then the idea is the level of that new concrete slab is at least 2 feet under our flood codes, and we're recommending anyone who elevates their house to be 3 feet above, just to be. If we're going to spend all the time and money, it costs about $200,000 to elevate the house. All the electrical has to get elevated, all the sewer lines, all the water lines, everything has to get hooked up, and then you put it down. It's about $200,000 to do that whole process. And if we're going to do all that, doesn't cost any more to go up 3 feet than it does 2 feet, so you might as well.
Mm-hmm.
How much of that expense will FEMA and the city and other sources take care of? Or maybe it varies by the person, but
Yeah, it varies and it's challenging. And for FEMA, it's very, very daunting to use FEMA to elevate a building. Very few were elevated after Irene. One of the big obstacles is that when you do a cost benefit analysis, which you have to do for all of these FEMA things, they immediately, as soon as you go in and say it's a historic building, which most of our buildings are, or eligible for historic registry, which almost all of our buildings are, then it becomes very expensive to and fails to BCA, because you've got to go through and do everything to historic codes because you're using federal money. And so after Irene, there were 10 properties, as an example, 10 properties in Waterbury who wanted to be elevated. At the end of the day, only one got elevated. The one that got elevated was the not historic one. The other 9 buildings that were historic either remained where they were and got reflooded in July, or were demolished. So it's kind of an ironic twist that because you can't put a historic foundation under a historic building, we would rather destroy the building than to have a not historic foundation under it. Makes no sense to me. I think it's boneheaded, but that's FEMA's philosophy. So because we have 18 housing units in those 10 buildings that we want to elevate here in Montpelier, we're making a special pitch, and we're pushing very hard on our legislators to go to take state money, to give the city $2 million of state money, so that way we don't have all those FEMA strings, and save these buildings. So that's our push, and that's what we've been pressing for really, really hard, because it costs $400,000 to build a new unit on average, and that's the state numbers when they say, hey, we're getting $880 million for new affordable housing, which they allocated last year, $80 million. We asked for $2 million to save 18 units. They said, no, we're only using this to build new units. So if we demolished those 18 units, it would cost $8 million to replace them. But they won't give me $2 million to save them. Again, I've said this many, many times, logic only gets you so far. I would think spending $2 million to save 18 units is a far better use of our money than to spend $2 million to demolish the building and then $8 million to replace those units. So I'm trying very hard, and the legislators are getting it. They do understand it, but it's always a battle because they have to go and convince all the other legislators to allocate. And it's not, they're starting to expand it. So they're going to try to make it a $5 million program to include other towns. It's not just money for Montpelier, but it would be money for other towns that were similarly damaged that would say, hey, if your building can be saved reasonably with elevating the foundation, we'll provide that money. Because all of these folks did everything correctly. All the folks we're working with all have flood insurance. They all did everything they were supposed to. They took out flood insurance. They did everything. But the money will only let them fix their building exactly where it is. It won't let them elevate it. And they're just like, well, why would I spend my $250,000 to fix my house and leave it to flood again? So that's why we're doing it the way we are. And I'm hoping we'll get it. So that's the long answer to the question of what will FEMA do? Nothing, which is why we're going to ask the state to step up and do their stuff, to fill in the gap.
Okay, thanks, Mike. And it was a good update because it filled up the rest of our time perfectly. So, okay, guys, we'll meet again in a couple of weeks. We'll be probably working on the city plan again. And does anybody have anything before we go? No? Okay. Well, do we have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Motion from John. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second from Maria. Those in favor of adjournment, say aye.
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 All right, everybody. See you in 2 weeks. Have a great
Thanks,
night.
everyone. See you guys.
We'll definitely be recapping this, by the way. We'll be debriefing everything from tonight at the next meeting.